The Braves NLDS against the Phillies has turned into a best of three after a split at Truist Park, and now it's on to Philadelphia. But who's going to start game three for the Braves? As of now, we don't know, as Brian Snitker wasn't ready to announce after Thursday's workout. Welcome into BPTV, Cory McCartney and Grant McCauley with you. And Grant, it's an interesting debate. The rookie phenom Spencer Strider, who has not pitched since September 18th, or Charlie Morton, the veteran who had his struggles, especially late.
Yeah, and this is something we're going to get into, of course, on this episode of BPTV. And there's a good case to be made for both of these guys. And they both have a role to play as the Braves look to win this National League Division Series and move on. And it is now, as you mentioned, the best 2 out of 3. The Braves were able to split those first 2 games after losing the opener and beat the Phillies on a day that Zach Wheeler pitches and beat Zach Wheeler, to be honest with you. So there was some good and some bad and some, I think, in between for the Braves in those first 2 games. But as the series does move to Philadelphia and they have another big challenge in game 3 with Aaron Nola, it's going to be interesting to see what the decision is as far as what Braves pitcher is going to get the ball to start that game.
So Snitker said Thursday they're still weighing all scenarios, but Strider will be used in the series. In fact, Snitker said that if they had gone to extra innings in game 2, Strider was going to be available. So maybe that gives us some glimpse into the thinking. But if he only lasts a few innings, what does that do to the bullpen with the potential that they're playing 3 straight games if this series goes the distance?
Well, I think that we knew based on the amount of rest that the Braves got and the fact that the Braves high leverage relievers didn't have to throw in game 1, that you're going to be relying on them heavily, leaning on those guys heavily if you're in position to win games, keep games close, and give your team a chance to overcome, even if it's a late deficit. You're going to be looking for your high leverage guys to play a big part. But how do you cover all those innings before we're even talking about getting to AJ Minter and Raisel Iglesias, even Colin McHugh for that matter, and of course getting to the 9th inning where Kenley Jansen would have an opportunity to save a game? How do you get there? The Braves were not able to really utilize Max Fried to the best of his ability in game 1 because I don't think he felt his best, and quite obviously the Phillies capitalized on that. In game 2, Kyle Wright gave them exactly what they needed and had 6 strong innings, and the bullpen took care of the rest. So now with game 3, whether it's Spencer Strider or Charlie Morton, I think that the cases that we'll get into for both of these guys are going to be unique to each of them. I would look at Spencer Strider at this point as being a guy that you probably can't expect to be throwing 90 or 100 pitches after not pitching in a major league game since September the 18th. So the limitations on him would point to the fact that you're going to have somebody to back him up. Is that someone like Colin McHugh who could throw multiple innings? Is it Jesse Chavez? Is it Dylan Lee, whoever it might be, to help you get through at least 6 strong innings before you can tap in and start using those great bullpen arms that the Braves have had as their formula for success down the stretch here? That, I think, is what the Braves are looking at. But had Spencer Strider thrown in relief, we all, I think, would have gotten our answers as far as what role he was going to serve in the NLDS. But I don't think that they've eliminated any option as of right now. It's just looking at him as a starter. I think it'd be more than an opener, but less than, the normal 6 to 7 innings that you might ask for out of a starting pitcher were he on his regular rest and regular day in rotation, and not talking about an injury and a long layoff.
Yeah, I mean, the case for Strider, I mean, he's obviously been fantastic, and he's been fantastic against the Phillies. They hit 0.97 against him in 4 games with 3 starts. In those starts, he had a 1.45 ERA and 29 strikeouts to 5 walks. We know the potential of what he can do and just how dominant he can be, with that combination of that slider and that 4-seam fastball. But, certainly, again, it's just a matter of how deep he can go. I think that's really the only variable that you're looking at with him right now.
Yeah, and I would imagine that if you're being realistic about it, is it 65 to 75 pitches? Is it 80 pitches max? I mean, it would have to be somewhere in there, I would think, just based on how long it's been since Spencer Strider has been on a mound and starting a baseball game. And, he has not been able to even simulate going, up and down between innings. I mean, that's not the way that they've been throwing him because he's been nursing an injury. So this is going to be a unique decision for the Braves. Spencer Strider has said, though, that he feels as good now as he has at pretty much any point this season, because this has been a career high in innings for him. This has been a bit of a marathon for him, and I think he's passed this test for the most part with flying colors, but no one's immune to injury. But it also doesn't mean that I think the Braves should be so hesitant to utilize him that they may not give themselves a chance to use a pitcher who could be one of their biggest and best weapons in a way that would help them the most. So that, I think, is what they're discussing right now, is what is the way that it helps us win this series? What is the way that he can help us the absolute most? And I think we're all going to find out either in game 3 or game 4. I mean, the wait is going to end at some point. What role is he going to play? We're going to find out.
Meanwhile, Charlie Morton, a 6.23 ERA in his last 5 starts, a 5.47 ERA against the Phillies. That includes giving up 6 runs on 6 hits and 4 2/3 when he saw them last on September 25th at Citizens Bank Park. But you hear Brian Snitker talking the reverence with which he talks about Morton. I'm not saying that that's giving you an indication of which way they're leaning in, but if they go with Morton in game 3 and he falters, then Strider takes them out in an elimination game. And again, it's potentially asking the bullpen, if he can't go deep, to pick up a lot of innings if Strider's limited.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the name of the game in the postseason is you're going to lean on your bullpen. We saw the Braves do it last year. I mean, we saw them have to do it in the World Series to an extent that I don't know too many clubs I've ever seen have to do it, particularly when you get to the biggest stage of them all. And the Braves found a way to get through all of that. And it was all happening because Charlie Morton suffered a broken leg in game 1 of that series. Now, Charlie Morton has come back this year, and I think he's had some highs and some lows in his month of September. And his head-to-head matchups against the Phillies have not necessarily been his best of the season. But I will say this, and I asked Brian Snitker about it. You were there in his pregame availability before game 2. What kind of adjustment can Charlie Morton make, and what gives you the confidence that, he can be the pitcher that we've been accustomed to seeing? And Brian Snitker said, well, he's always a guy that's looking to make those improvements and find ways to get better. And when it comes down to it with Charlie Morton, you bank on and you lean on that experience as the big reason why he can find a way to get himself through a start like this and to give the Braves an opportunity to win a baseball game. Because Charlie Morton has the best postseason resume of any pitcher, I think, on either roster. So, staying away from him just because he's had some ups and downs this season isn't really something the Braves can afford to do. He's here, and he's been a big part of their success the last couple of years, and they need him to go out and have a vintage-style performance when he's called upon to start a game in this series.
Well, whoever it is going to be opposite Aaron Nola, who led the majors with a 6.3 FWAR. And with this being his only start in the series, I firmly expect there's going to be no restrictions on him. He's going to be able to go as deep as he can, coming off 101 pitches and 6 2/3 scoreless against the Cardinals in the wild card round. He was dominant then, and obviously he's going to need to be everything for the Phillies in game 3.
Yeah, and Aaron Nola is a Cy Young candidate, I feel like, just about every year. But I think, like Charlie Morton, has had some ups and downs this season. But don't let his 11-13 record fool you. This is a guy that can go out there and do exactly what he did to the St. Louis Cardinals, pile up a bunch of strikeouts, miss a bunch of bats, and give the Phillies a chance to win in this game. And as we know, as we've talked about with Brian Snitker and with various Braves players throughout this week at media availability, there are no secrets between these two clubs. They've met 19 times before this series started, so they know each other extremely well. Aaron Nola faced the Braves 5 times this season, had a 3-2 record, an ERA creeping up towards 4, had some good performances, had some not so great performances, but one thing that was there were all of those strikeouts. The Braves, however, did hit 5 home runs against him in those 5 meetings this year. And as I know we always focus on with the Braves, they're an offense typically predicated by the home run. If they can get a couple of those going against Aaron Nola, they could put themselves in a pretty good spot coming off a game in which you pointed out they didn't homer and they won a baseball game, and that doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, speaking of all those homers, obviously the Braves hit more of them than anyone in the NL. They had the fewest wins in games in which they did not homer, but in game 2, they won with opportunistic small ball. But in both games in this series so far, Matt Olson has been one of the hottest bats. He hit a 3-run home run in game 1, got things started in game 2 with an RBI single. And then there's Ronald Acuna Jr., who's had 4 hits. Travis d'Arnaud has driven in 4, including a homer. Austin Riley, though, and Dansby Swanson had 2 spectacular catches in game 2, but they've combined for 2 hits and 8 strikeouts. Michael Harris is second, is hitless. So is Orlando Arcia. Grant, who in your mind just really needs to step up for this lineup offensively as things shift to Philly?
I think it's hard not to look at Dansby Swanson and expect there to be some big hit somewhere in this series for him, because he always seems to find himself in those places. The at-bats for Austin Riley, I feel like he's just been a tick off, and he talked about kind of missing some of his pitches over the plate and not really making the most of those opportunities. But as we talked about with him, even in late September, early October, he didn't feel like the quality of his at-bats have been so poor the last couple of months. He just has not been able to capitalize and really turn it into the kind of power production we were seeing in the middle of the summer when he was hitting extra base hits galore. But it's a pretty obvious thing for me to say that the number 2 hitter and the number 3 or 4 hitter in your lineup have got to come up and do some big things. Michael Harris got robbed of what could have been a double that knocks in a run or 2 in game 1. I feel like he's hit the ball hard more times than not. And with his speed, it's always a factor. He can do something for the Braves. So it's the usual suspects for me. And it can't just be one guy. And I think we're seeing that with Ronald Acuna Jr. finding his way on base a bunch of times in this series. You've got to have the 2 hitter, the 3 hitter, the 4 hitter, somebody coming through with some big hits there. Travis d'Arnaud, I think, right now, if we're honest, if there was a National League Division Series MVP, would probably be the front runner for it for the Braves for the work he's done both at the plate and behind the plate. He's come up with some big hits, and he's going to need, I would imagine, to come up with a few more of those because the Braves 1 through 9 are going to need those contributions. It can't just all be on the shoulders of one player, no matter how good he is, no matter how hot he's been at any point during the season.
I will say with Riley, though, I mean, among NL East players, he was first in average against the Phillies, second in OPS, third in weighted run created plus. He had 9 doubles and a homer against him. He's 1 for 8 with a walk in this series. I mean, that obviously has to change. He feasted on Aaron Nola this season, a 1,200 OPS, a 533 average. I just think he's primed for a breakout, and obviously the Braves are going to need it. The Phillies hit the 5th most home runs at home. They have 2 players in the top 6 in the NL in that department, Kyle Schwarber, Rhys Hoskins. Keeping them in the ballpark is going to be an absolute feat for this Braves staff.
Yeah, it will be. But when you look at these two teams and you look at home runs allowed by these two clubs, I mean, the Braves were the 5th fewest in all of baseball, and the Phillies were the 4th fewest, or was it the other way around? Either way, you're talking about bottom 5 for these two clubs. I think it was 150 home runs allowed for the Phillies. So that would put them 5th fewest, 148 home runs, I believe, allowed by the Braves staff all season long. These are two clubs that have done a good job of keeping the ball in the park, but Citizens Bank Park, as we know, can play pretty small. I talked about the success the Braves have had against Aaron Nola with 5 home runs against him. Matt Olson's hit a bunch of home runs up in Philadelphia, 5 home runs head-to-head against the Phillies prior to the NLDS starting, and he already has 1 in this series. And you talked about Austin Riley, a 350 hitter against the Phillies throughout the course of the season. Very quiet thus far. So it'll be interesting to see what these two offenses can do. We know the Phillies know how to mash. They've done it, and that home ballpark is very conducive to them. But I do feel like the Braves may be a little bit under the radar in terms of the home run prevention because we spent so much time talking about the home runs they've been hitting all season long.
Well, the Braves' title defense continues, and we've got you covered all the way here on BP TV. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell a friend. Also, be sure to tune in to 92.9 The Game in Atlanta as the NLDS continues. We'll be on with special post-game coverage on From the Diamond. Until next time, I'm Cory McCartney. He's Brian McCauley, and we'll see you soon, Braves country.